In the 1997 film Contact, a character argues that an atheist should not qualify for candidacy for a mission to potentially make first contact with an alien race. The rationale behind that stance was that an atheist would be a poor representative for the rest of the world because the majority of the Earth's population believes in a God that the atheist by definition does not. It's also suggested that a non-believer must consider the majority of the world to be crazy and delusional, and therefore not a majority that he or she would be fit to represent. S.E. Cupp is a conservative and allegedly atheist blogger and co-host on MSNBC's The Cycle. She gave a similar rationale as for why she would apparently never vote for an atheist president. In addition to the candidate not having a chance and her not feeling an atheist could be a valid political representative for a theistic majority, Cupp also said, and I quote, "I like it there's a check, okay, that there's a person in office who doesn't think he's bigger than the state. I like religion being a check and knowing that my president goes home every night addressing someone above him and not thinking all the power resides right here. Atheists don't have that." There's a problem with the concept that holding an unpopular opinion on one given issue should nullify someone's entire qualification as a representative for those other people, especially when it comes to politics. I consider it common sense to avoid letting single issues polarize people from being represented from those qualified to represent them. It's nearly impossible to find two people who agree on every single conceivable point of discussion. Fortunately, it's entirely possible for someone to get along with and even to represent other people, even if that person doesn't walk in lockstep agreement with all constituents on every single issue. The interesting real-life example of this for me is that the United States has never and may never have an openly atheist president. However, every president we've had has been required to preside over a secular democracy, not a theocracy. I don't feel misrepresented by a Christian politician just because he or she doesn't share my stance on religion. Christians can and have fought for secular policies in government, and likewise, atheists can and have fought for equal rights for all people despite their religious stances. As for thinking that all people of faith are delusional or insane, I certainly don't. The vast bulk of my family and friends are religious, and I understand that it's mostly due to cognitive dissonance. Them having an illogical belief on one issue doesn't mean they will automatically apply that same lack of logic to every other issue they encounter in their lives. Likewise, a believer may consider me to be terribly lost because I don't share his or her faith, but it's still possible for that same believer in God to understand that a non-believer like me can be a generally kind, well-meaning, and intelligent person. The issue doesn't have to be as strictly and intrinsically polarizing as some people make it out to be. It's also noteworthy that a representative for a majority who holds an opinion that doesn't represent that majority can still acknowledge that about themselves. An atheist president may publicly say something like, "I don't believe in God, but that doesn't mean my entire country doesn't, and it doesn't mean to me that those who don't matter any less than those who share my disbelief." Cupp's specific addendum is shockingly unintelligent in its conclusion. She suggests that any theists in office have built-in ego checks because they have to answer to a higher power, which humbles them. A higher power she doesn't believe exists. It's laughable to suggest that if a president doesn't believe in any gods, his or her ego is bound to grow consequentially out of control, or that an imaginary god is the exclusive check in place for the presidential office. There's a series of checks and balances the president has to work with and answer to. It's a little thing called Congress. Maybe you've heard of it. Adversely, it's strange that Cupp thinks a god that she believes exists only in that president's imagination is going to hold him or her in check rather than amplify his or her ego. Perhaps Cupp, who apparently has studied and appreciates a multitude of religions, hasn't yet figured out that people tend to gravitate into denominations of their religion which they happen to mostly agree with, and they tend to think that as people of God, the big decisions they are making are the ones that God would approve of. So, rather than a truly religious president going home and getting an ego checked while on his or her knees, it's really just a conversation with his or her own conscience, which everyone does when they think about things carefully. The difference is that a non-religious person doesn't walk away from an internal self-conversation believing that the decision he or she arrived at must have the stamp of approval of the almighty creator of all the cosmos. That being said, I'm still not terrified of having a religious president, not even one as blatantly unsophisticated and religious as George Bush, who claimed to take direct instructions from God regarding political policy. That doesn't concern me nearly as much as the actions of those in Congress whose job it is to review, critique, and rule on the policies that president attempts to pass. Thanks to them, we can cast our votes based on a candidate's platform and political history. And then again, we would have to do some reading and listening in order to do that. So, fuck it.